Schedules today. Welcome everybody, and welcome to our foreign visitors. Thanks for coming along. So this is the first of the skills workshops that we're going to be doing, but we don't want them to be like normal tutorials. We want you guys to interact with the speakers, to question them, to really get the most out of these tutorials. So if there are things you want to know, make sure you find out, okay? And I hope you find them useful, I hope you find them interesting. And also, please take advantage of meeting the visitors that we have. I think I should introduce them. It's Mark Lupinawaki from Logic Mills, Mr. Sieg from Logic Mills, and Christoph Hintermüller from GTech. So Logic Mills is an educational provider in Singapore, and GTech is a high-tech neuroimaging company, I guess is how you...
Biosignal processing,
okay.
neurology, and so on, with focus on brain-computer interface with neurology and all that.
Okay.
Brain.
So on Wednesday you're going to tell us properly what you do. and here we have Ellie from Delft, who's interested in sound design. So we have already a variety of people here, so I hope you enjoy interacting with each other and you enjoy these sessions. So, thanks.
Right, so good morning everybody. So this is it. This is session 1, workshop 1. I can feel the weight of expectation on my shoulders. It's like being status quo at Live Aid. For those of you that can remember. having to kick off. But fortunately my job is very easy because I only get 10 minutes to talk. I'm really only here to introduce Mona and Mike, who are going to be running the bulk of this session, which is all about information gathering, which is a broad umbrella term for all sorts of research, literature search, and we're going to be talking in very general terms. Mona is massively experienced in doing systematic reviews, and Mike's got wonderful, interesting things to say about interdisciplinary approaches to information gathering. And my job is really just to give some introductory remarks. Now, I teach on the Researchers Development Programme an information gathering afternoon, which takes 3 hours, and I'm now going to squeeze that down into 4 slides. So here we go. These are the 4 slides. So what is research? Now, if this was the 3-hour version, then we would break up into groups and workshop this, and you would come back with your ideas. If anyone wants to shout out an idea now, that would be. We've got 10 seconds.
It's supposed to be fun. My favorite description.
So after many iterations of doing this with a wide range of graduate students and boiling down everything they say and putting up bullet points and having a good old argument, we got an answer. Research is the way that we do things. And this is the true challenge of interdisciplinarity, is that everybody does things in different ways. And it's remaining open to that, which is one of the real challenges of teaching research methods and literature review methods to a mixed group. But from your point of view, it's a practical challenge of remaining open to different methods, different methodologies, different communities of discourse in your own work, because this is an explicitly interdisciplinary study group. So research is merely the way that we do things. Good start. But there must be something which characterises research beyond that. And I've chosen to adapt some bullet points from a guy called Bruce Archer. Hands up if anyone's ever heard of Bruce Archer. Excellent. Gives you something to Google when you've finished. I won't bore you with the story of Bruce Archer's life, but anyway, this is what Bruce Archer has to say, and it's very influential on me, and I hope that it will be very influential on you as well. Research is anything, effectively, which is purposive. based on the identification of an issue worthy and capable of investigation. It is inquisitive. It is driven by your desire to seek and acquire new knowledge. It is informed, doesn't start from nothing. It's informed by whatever has gone before it. It is methodical. In fact, many people would argue that the method is more important than actually what comes out of it. And it is communicable. And anything which meets these 5 things counts in some normative area as a research effort. Now, I put these up here mostly so that you can bear them in mind when the rest of the talk is happening and when you have your own subsequent discussions after as to whether or not you agree or disagree with this. But these things are arguably in common to all areas of discourse. So the next question is, what is the object of research? We've now skipped forward about an hour and a half. And we're up to what is the object of research. And again, we have 10 seconds for somebody to shout something out. What's the object of research?
To answer in a justifiable way a question that matters to community researchers. Can I hire you the next time? No, that is exactly it. This is why we're all here. This is why Mona and Mike are going to be introducing you to the wonders of these things. The object of research is it allows us to take our place in the discourse community, whatever your discourse community is, except for the fact for you it's slightly more difficult because you're an interdisciplinary group, so you have arguably more than one discourse community. Or maybe you just have a single discourse community which is much broader than average, which makes it that much more difficult. You don't need to do research to hold an opinion. If you want to hold an opinion, you just get a box and stand on it and shout from the street corner. That's perfectly legal in this country. And even if it weren't, you could do it on the internet, right? So you don't need anything in order to hold and to put forward an opinion. But if you want to take your place in the discourse community, in the academic community, then that has to be backed up with research. And that is the first and principal object of doing it. And the second and principal object of doing it is to provide normative warrants to establish our intellectual right to defend a contribution. Now I've drawn this deliberately from post-positive philosophy 101. The idea that evidence is a warrant, it covers a broader idea than what we would usually call evidence. And that our intellectual right, not our legal right, but our intellectual right to defend a particular conjecture is based on the warrants that we can put forward for it. In scientific terms, this translates as to provide data to support a hypothesis, right? But in other discourse groups, it translates in slightly different ways. And it's part of the point of this course, and partly the point of what's going to come up to be said, to show you some of the other ways in which this can be true. And the last bit is probably even the most important. This is just my personal views, and you're absolutely at liberty to disagree with them, but it's just a jumping off point by which I hope that you will judge what other people say. So without any further ado, I will give the stage over to Mona, and she's going to say all sorts of really interesting things.
I thought everybody starts with the title, and I thought I'd start with a painting on the first slide. And actually, I have to say, I've stolen the idea from somebody else. This is from Trisha Greenhalgh, gave a presentation last week in Manchester. And this is an artist who tidies up art. So I would tell you first how you do a literature review to tidy up research, but then I'll also tell you about the literature review you stay there rather than tidying up. Okay? And I have to give you a warning. I have done a few PowerPoints. Every time Martin said you have to make it more simple, I send them to him. In the morning I told him last night that it's too simple and too, not interesting enough. I made it more complicated. And he gave me a look that I was scared. So if it's too complicated, it's my fault. Hopefully it's not. So many of you heard that I do have a background in dentistry, but I have also a background in working with systematic review and have technology assessment. My first time I was giving a lecture, it was in the same school that I studied, and the director of my PhD supervisor, my doctoral supervisor was also there. She sat in the back to help me, because she said you don't speak loud enough. So she made this, speak louder, and did this, speak slower, because when I get excited, I speak
Can I do
fast. Yes, yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you think I'm talking not loud enough, just say this, and if I'm talking not too fast, do this. So we are hands-on. I have help warning in this that I have, in order to meet everybody, I have simplified some concept very much. So those of you who are stats, I do apologize, it's a bit too simplified. And I try to explain every word that is there, that's complicated, but if you come up with a word that's unfamiliar, just raise your hands and ask me, please do interrupt me if I come up with a word that's not familiar. Yeah? How many of you have read the article that I've given you? Email. Oh, come on. How many watched the YouTube video? Oh, I expected to know everybody has read it. So. Okay, so what we do, I do structured presentation around Sherlock Holmes, because I thought many of these codes was very much fit with what we do in literature review. And I start with the first one. There's nothing more deceptive than obvious fact. So if you had read the article that I emailed, it was about the story that some people did a literature review about Tamiflu, which is a medication, anti-flu medication. And first they did the review, and it looked like it works. And governments spent millions to buy this thing, stack it up to prevent epidemic. And then there was somebody pointed out that there was a conference proceedings that all of the things that are published are positive and sponsored by the people who are producing it. And they have heard about the conference proceedings that shows that it doesn't work. So they put, for 4 years, putting pressure on Roche, the producer, to give them the data. The first day they gave them the data, they couldn't use it and make sense of it, because what the company does, they flood you with information. It gives you, it's so much information printed, complicated, you cannot go through it. Eventually they get the information, and it came up, it isn't that beneficial, it also has adverse effects. So, and that's one of the things, there's nothing more deceptive than obvious facts. So if you do a literature review and come to something very obvious, you have to think, is it really that obvious or not? So, in this, what we call this, when you only see, everything you look at published literature, and what you see is only positive results, we call that publication bias. But before I explain publication bias, you can tell me what bias is. What's bias? Go.
Cognitive distortion in general terms.
Okay. What else?
To skew your perception in one direction.
How would you define bias in a research study?
Non-uniform weighting of hypothesis. Non-uniform weighting of hypothesis.
Okay. Anybody else? One of the things I usually like as an example is the archery example. Many of you have heard it. So imagine I'm a very good archer, and every time I take a kind of hit a target. You know, I have a bit of a variation, sometimes a bit higher to explore. Sometimes I'm not very good to target, and no archer, and I'm hitting all over the place. So what we call in research, when things like that happen, we call that random error. So I have a lot of random error. I just randomly kind of make mistakes. Sometimes a little bit more when I'm less experienced, and less when I'm experienced. But imagine my bow has a problem. So every time I want to try to get the target, I get 2 centimeters left. Yeah? So even if I'm a good, what I don't. Sorry. Okay, good. Sorry. So which one I push that? Okay, I don't know what I did. So it gets there. So even I'm a good archer, I'm targeting the middle, it goes 2 centimeters there. And if I'm a bad archer, it will look like that. So that's called systematic error. So systematic error is what we call bias. Yeah? Makes sense? That's what we call bias using research studies. And what happened there, they have found, if you start a publication of somebody who published their studies, if it would be random, it would look like this. And if it would be biased, it would look like this. So what they have, they only found positive studies, and they couldn't find the negative studies. Yeah, makes sense? Sure. Nobody's screaming yet? That's good. So go on.
Providing that the black human center is the absolute truth, or
Yes.
how would you measure the distortion in your research?
That was the reason of the health warning. It's a very simplified version. That's very true. It makes an assumption, but just in case getting for everybody's right, I tried to do it. But you're very right. Usually we don't have the target, so we don't know what the truth is. So it's about how much we can guess to come. But I think I have a slide at the end that makes that point a bit clearer. I think that's the reason for the health warning. I couldn't find a way to explain that would be simple, but at the same time kind of makes the point. Cool. So, and we have it with everything. So everything that what we noticed, we have done meta studies. If something is positive, it's published more often. It's published rapidly. It's published in more important journals. It's usually more talked about, and it's usually published in English. So if you do what you usually do in literature reviews, you look at studies that you find easily, you ask your professor what are the main articles about it, you tend to find always one dimension of the research rather than the negative one. Yeah? And it's even a bit worse that people even report the data in the study, the part that are positive and the part that are negative, they wouldn't report it. Yeah? Imagine I want to see what is the mean weight, height, and age of you guys, and I say, okay, the height and the age looks good, but I don't want anybody to know how much you weigh. So something like that, because I didn't like what the result was. It's just an example. So that goes with the world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. So there are lots of things, if you don't look at them systematically, you wouldn't see them. Cool. Everybody is still, yeah, cool. If you have any questions, please do interrupt me. So, I know that somebody has done a systematic review here, standing inside, but I assume most of you didn't do a systematic review. So, what type of information do you collect when you do a literature review in your previous work? What type of information do you collect? You did a literature review, what do you do? Yeah, go on. You keep the articles. Here, go on.
Articles?
Articles, yeah, articles. Very clever. Okay, what else? Do you record, collect any other information when you do a literature review?
You use books as well?
Books, yeah. Let's go. Anything else? That's actually a good point. Sometimes in some disciplines, the research is only in the books. Yeah.
That's methodology, how they research.
How do you research? The process, yeah, exactly. Anything else?
Sites, different sites,
Yeah,
like laboratories that study what you study.
yeah, exactly. So what I collect, I'll tell you what I collect now. Substantive. What I mean with substantive is, when I have all of these articles, I make point, this article, this is important, and this is what I want, and so I have data collection forms what I collect from the studies. I collect the process, as you said, where did I search, which day I searched, and how extensive I searched, so I can get back and see where is my gaps, where I have to done a better job, and management. Because if you, especially, this wouldn't apply for when you do a simple literature review, and when you do a very extensive systematic literature review, you have to have a management strategy, where you are, what you're doing is, and how you manage it. Okay? Cool. The most of the reviews you see in the literature are narrative reviews, but you have a few kind of smaller group of reviews that are systematic reviews. You know about literature reviews. What I'd like to introduce to you today is also that there is a type of reviews which we call systematic review, and you can have it as part of your research methodology. So you can use it as part of your research methodology, unlike normal literature reviews. And it's exactly the same as your primary research. Instead of having your human beings as your object of research, you have people's literature as your object of research. Yeah, makes sense? And you have a way of, you have methods to, you have standardized methods to reduce bias. The reason I put this definition up rather than the standard definition that we see in the literature is because there is kind of, there are strands of cultural and kind of, beliefs how systematic reviews have been done by people. So different people have, some people have very strict view of how a systematic review should look like, and other things when we have very complex questions, we have to be creative about the methodology. So I kind of wanted to have a definition that encompasses all of them. So, very simply, when you do a systematic review, you start with a question, you plan your review, you develop a comprehensive search, and the exercise you have, you get a go about doing a search, and you have to have an unbiased selection abstraction process. So when we do a systematic review, when we did the search, the two people go through all of each result and compare what they have done and agree whether they have done it right or wrong. So to have an unbiased selection abstraction process. And we have a way to look at the validity of the studies. And different disciplines in different areas of research, you have different, and for different questions, you have different criteria for validity. So you somehow have to put them together, and you have to somehow interpret them. So I first thought I'd give you an idea about different ways to ask good questions. We have some structures we use. So for example, with a question, sorry, it's a health question. I do apologize for that, but it's not something I'm more familiar with. So if I want to ask you, you know what bad breath is? It's a very uncomfortable thing when you have a dentist and you have to treat the patient. It's very uncomfortable. And you want to see whether hair from mouth rinses are more effective than other available mouth rinses. One of the first things we do, which might sound a bit too simplistic, naive, but it's actually quite important, is to give a structure to our question. And we have a structure, it's called the people structure. P stands for population. So what is your population in this question?
People with bad breath.
Yes. What's the intervention? I know it's very simplified, but I promise you the second one is more count. What's five? Intervention.
One group will have like a horrible, and the other another.
Yeah, and the outcome?
The outcome.
What's the outcome?
Do you expect that?
C?
What was C?
Do not have
C is comparison.
Oh,
So
okay.
the other available. Sorry.
Right.
Sorry. I is intervention, C is comparison. What's the outcome? And measurements. But that's the tricky part, because one of the things to do is to think about, okay, scientists, when you do an experimental study, you always want to measure something you can measure. But when you do a systematic review, you have to first think, who's using this review, what is the outcome they want to hear, and then think what the scientists can measure. It's very difficult. We have undergraduate dentist students who come from a science background, and they always want to put something that's measurable. But nobody might care for your patients, they might not care about it. So it's diverging between what your stakeholder wants, which markets the patient. It could be a policymaker, or it could be somebody from industry, versus what you can measure, and understand the difference between them. Interesting halitosis. Halitosis is the kind of technical term for bad breath. You pass it, so we have, that's one of the structures. The other one is called PICO structure, which is when you have E stands for, this one stands for, this is population, exposure, comparison, outcome. So it would be adult, passive smoking, not being exposed, and or cancer. Yeah, makes sense? Okay, now a bit complicated. Do decision aids help you with placing treatment or screening decision? Have anybody heard about decision aid? So it's something, if you are a patient, then you might have to make a complicated decision, like whether you want to go to surgery in the oncology department, or something that's very complicated. You have a lot of options to make decisions. One of the things they realize, if you can just give you the information, you cannot process it. So they have these tools that helps you to go through it, to help you make the decision, way to up and down, sometimes visual, has diagrams, and so on. It's called decision aid. The question is, does it help you to make decisions? What would be your P? Your population?
Patients.
Yeah, a patient who wants to make a decision. Yeah? Okay. What's the intervention?
The question and the decision. No, that's that.
You're almost there.
Decision is.
Decision.
Decisions are.
Okay, so in this question, you actually want to see different decision aids whether they work or not. And it looks complicated because the first question, as when you come to do this, what is a decision aid? What I categorize as a decision aid? And different groups have different definition. And then you have to categorize how decisions are different, so that you have to look at the different questions. So that's how, when you use this structure, it gets more complicated. When you begin to have a board that's defined by different groups differently, and you have come up with a common definition, how you define it and how you categorize it. And that would be a case when you do it. And that's going to be quite important when you do literature reviews interdisciplinary. Be sure that everybody's on the same page what the definition is. Yeah? I didn't want to challenge you with the outcomes. The outcomes were 2 pages. This was actually a literature review was done. So the outcomes definition was very complicated. So it ended up with 2 pages because they had to conceptualize what does it mean, a better decision. And it's kind of difficult to define it. How we would categorize it, how would different people measure it, and how we would kind of compare them to each other. Yeah? Okay. I got my first sign. Okay, I will talk louder. Okay, sometimes it's actually not so simple, and you end up, when you have very complex questions, you have to sit down and do a map, or do something like that. So you have to sit and make a map, what your problem is, what your topic area is. So sometimes you cannot fit it in your focus question. You have to make a diagram what your question is. Yeah? And here is an example. The previous one was trying to make the chain of food supply, and the second one is about hemoglobin. This is actually an environmental science question. They wanted to see whether you go to these protected areas, does it make you feel better? And when they wanted to define the question, they had a bit of a challenge, and they ended up to make a diagram to sure that everybody in the team to understand what the topic is that they are looking on. Okay, so you have to define your question. Where do you go to search?
Online.
Online, good. I tried to Well, hey, most of the electronic databases are the kind of electronic version of this old thing, isn't it? So, yeah. What else?
The library.
So, where do you go online? Where do you search?
Google.
Did we really employ all of you? You all search Google?
Web of Science or Science Library.
Oh yeah, that's good. They
Scopus.
Yeah, you have done a system review, didn't you?
Yeah.
You have. So, where did you search in your system review?
We did PubMed and Embase.
Embase, okay. So can you tell everybody what PubMed and Embase are?
Which is basic, well, the websites,
Database.
archives, and the most interesting things.
Sorry, I framed you. You said that.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you want to say?
I would go to a meta search engine basically in order to pull all the different resources together. Then you're not that biased, because if you rely on one specific search engine, then you obviously get what their search algorithm suggests, and you're limited to that.
Anybody else?
But also, I would like to look for data in real world, so don't restrict yourself to public resources, but just ordinary experience can be the data source as well. And then you can try to validate it with perhaps some substantial literature review.
I think what you're referring to is when you do the question formulation, is that where your experience come in to actually shape where the kind of broader of this question is? That's where your experience come in. Do a literature review. The literature review can only tell you what people have done research on. Still have to look at the gaps. So some people engage with other people during this process to kind of get other people's view, but it's a different type of research to do it. So.
Okay, but you need to get an idea what to look for, and therefore you
yeah,
need your experience in order to basically get an idea which way you're going.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is when you do the question formulation, that's where your experience coming to kind of scope where you are. And so, yeah, it's called Medline is, have you heard about the NIH, National Institute of Health in the US, or National Library of Medicine in the US? Yes. So these are big governmental things that the US government does. The National Library of Medicine gets all of these journals, tries to index them into an electronic database. I'm trying to keep in time so to get time for exercise. Get them all indexed and provides them So they call this database Medline. So you can search it with a very public interface, it's PubMed, you can freely access it, but universities have also paid interfaces to search them. They call them OBI, browse go. When you talk with the librarian, they will explain it to you how to use them. It's more information specialists when they use it. They can use different techniques when you have different interfaces. And Embase is another database. It has more European drawn on it than Medline, otherwise more American. So just two examples of it. So Medline, we talked about Embase. There are other databases. I knew the ones I knew about Psych-Info is more psychological. AMED is the Allied Complementary Medicine. ERIC is the educational one. And like Google, you can search them, but you have to learn about different techniques that they use to search. They have different features to look at it. There are other databases in other fields, and WebOpsite is a good example of science.
Scopus, I think, is also very good. It's very broad.
Yeah, I think Scopus is a bit tricky to try to get a consistent, because as every scientist, when you use this much reviews as a research project, you want to have a kind of consistent doing search. My experience with Scopus, I find it a bit difficult to get a consistent one. But with Medline, they are very established with the search strategy. You can build a good, repeatable search strategy. So, a very basic searching, I suppose that you would have some meeting with some librarian that explain the searching as a very, very basic. If I had a question about the halitosis, this people helps me to find the words. So you search with keywords rather than phrases. You find the keywords relevant for each of them, and you put them together with something called Boolean operators. Means that you tell the database, search any article that has all 4 words in it. Yeah? I don't know. So that looks complicated. That looks what the real search looks like. But this is when you can build up things like that, then you know how the database works. It just shows you it looks more complicated. So the Boolean operators, we have AND, it means we tell the database we want an article that has both keywords, or you say either of them, and don't want one of them. Yeah? So, and how you do that is, that's where your question structure helps you. If you have a structured question, you think about, okay, how are the different ways people say bad breath? Where's my breath from? Oh, here's it. Bad breath, how they say mouthwash and control, and if you are using words for the same concept, you say either of them, so you say or. If you have a concept from different groups, you say and. So, yeah.
So would this mean that you might have to do all combinations of these? So you would have to do file breadth, Listerine, placebo, and sulfide monitor, and in order to be able to get the most.
That's a good question, and let's go to the next slide, because when you have all of this set up, you have to make a decision how much you want to use the electronic database to search, how much you search manually, and how you want to be, how narrow you search. So if you use all of them, you have a narrow search, but most of the articles are relevant to what you want. But sometimes, because these are computer programs, they can mess up and they can do wrong things. So sometimes you prefer to do broad search, use less words, but go through them manually and select the studies. So it's a decision whether you want to be specific or comprehensive. So, yeah, does that answer the question? So you put them there, it's just to have a structure, you put them there and then decide what to do with them. Cool. So at that stage, you have a data collection quality assessment part, so you decide of the validity of the studies. I don't go through, this is because of the type of study I had a specific criteria for quality. The reason I put it here, it has a nice color code. It's green means good, yellow means they didn't told us what, and red means bad. But you have different criteria based on what the question is. Okay, is anybody screaming at me now? So if you end up having good quality studies, you want to synthesize them, there is a way to do it, it's called meta-analysis, and I explain it to you. You remember targets that I put you there. Usually when you have, this was the one that I was a very good archer, and that was, that was a good archer and that was not a good archer. Yeah? If I remove the target, usually you don't have a target, and you have to guess where the target is. Okay? If I know, if it's a good study, this is a short one, and if it's not a good study, it has a lot of imprecision, it's a longer line. But that's how we show the precision of the studies in the group. So that's actually, each of them is one study and tells you how precise or how focused is, how precise or imprecise the study is. Yeah? So, and we have something, that's what we call no effect lines. Everything that crossed the lines means the study concluded that these two have no differences. And when it's on one side, it means you find a difference. And when you put them all together, it tells you whether the combined effect is, there is an effect or not. Does anybody can read us favorite stocking and favorite not stocking? Can anybody guess what the question was they were evaluating? No? It was when you go on flight airplanes, you have these long stock things that you put in to increase circulation, and they were looking whether it improves your outcome or not. So people do research on that, and then they show it like that. Okay, so this is supposed to be simple. The only reason I show you, they had actually a PhD in design student to actually help them to design a table to actually put the data together. That's all to tell you. They have done kind of this kind of studies having designers to help them to design a kind of combined study of it. So, but the problem is you could do all of this work and you still at the end don't know what's happening, and that's very often happens. You think you know. There's so many studies done. There are people spending their whole life doing this work. They have to have an answer and do a systematic review. And there's nothing, you don't know. So, let me just go less though. I need to know by this time when the effect of history closed a long train of studies. And now I've went over my time, and I think the slides that I added, and Martin told me I made too complicated, he was right. So I skipped the slide and go to the exercise. so you see Martin was wrong. So. Fine with that. Okay, so it's your turn. And that's my favorite from the tidy occupation, the first last page, that's my favorite. So, you have computers, and I don't want you to come back. You don't need to come back and give a report back, and I come there and you can ask me questions about it. The question that I want you to search, and there is a cognitive review, this is much review about it, does sugar improves cognitive performance? I always eat chocolate when I'm upset. Presence doesn't have improved cognitive performance. Yeah? And I have done a grouping for all of you, so if you could do it in groups. I was very lazy.